Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to episode 26 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation E.N.D. We begin this episode with Number 1 and his dad fishing on a boat on a lake around the time of sunrise. Suddenly, Number 86 and several other Kids Next Door operatives arrive in a 2x4 technology vehicle that resembles a rooftop powered by jets. And Number 86 declares that Number 1 is scheduled for decommissioning. Number 1 points out that he still has a few years to go before he's 13 years old, but Number 86 dismisses this as something that all almost decommissioned operatives would say. Number 1 counters that Number 86 should know his actual age, considering the fact that they're in the same grade. He even goes as far as to point out that they shared the same kindergarten class. But Number 86 dismisses this point and insists that the computer says that Number 1 is scheduled for decommissioning, therefore it must be true. Seeing that Number 86 refuses to listen to reason, Number 1 starts up the boat and makes his escape with his dad. Number 86 responds that Nigel Uno is someone who always likes to do things the hard way. Not that she has any problem with that, mind you, and proceeds to give chase. We also see that there is a second jet-powered rooftop piloted by Kids Next Door operatives on the lake. So Number 1 is being chased after by two jet-powered rooftops. Using a combination of a newspaper and a fishing rod, Number 1 is able to successfully escape from the decommissioning squad, regardless of which vehicles they're using, whether it be the jet-powered rooftops or the vehicles that resemble dodos. They're even called dodos, by the way. And Number 1 is even able to steer the boat around on land. Eventually, Number 1 and Mr. Uno's boat crashes inside of a bus, and so Number 1 and Mr. Uno proceed to just ride the bus all the way back home. Upon arriving home, Mr. Uno says he's going to lie down for a while after all the excitement from their most recent fishing trip, while Number 1 wonders out loud who in Kids Next Door Global Command would possibly want to decommission him before he becomes 13 years old. After the bus leaves, we see that Number 86 and several other members of the decommissioning squad have caught up, and they even have some other members of the decommissioning squad pilot a 2x4 technology vehicle that essentially cuts the Sector V treehouse from the tree trunk growing within the middle of the Uno home and taking the Sector V treehouse who knows where. The bottom line, though, is that Number 1 no longer has access to the Sector V treehouse. Number 86 accuses Number 1 of making a mistake while claiming that she never makes mistakes. Number 1 counters, however, that Number 86 just made a mistake in angering him. And Number 1 proceeds to open up his mailbox and throw some of the mail inside like throwing stars, so he's able to disarm the decommissioning squad members that he's facing right now, and he's able to escape while still carrying one envelope from the mailbox on hand to act as an improvised weapon. And Number 86 is furious that Number 1 managed to escape yet again. A little while later, we see that Number 1 is able to construct a quick disguise using a white coat, a handkerchief around his face, and he even managed to find a cat to rest on his head to make it look like he has hair. But yes, Number 1 has a disguise already, and he's able to walk around the neighborhood while still trying to use stealth, as several members of the decommissioning squad are still looking for him. Eventually, when Number 1 enters one particular yard, someone taps him on the shoulder, and number one prepares his battle stance, but soon he sees that he has, it's not a member of the Decommissioning Squad who tapped his shoulder. The individual is actually the supreme leader of the kids next door, number 274. Number 274 has a proud tone in his voice when he says he knew that number one would be able to give the Decommissioning Squad members the slip. But then he starts to act nervous when he sees the envelope that number one is holding, questioning him about it. Number one just says that it was an improvised weapon that he needed because of the circumstances he's currently in. Number 274 then proceeds to explain to number one that he's right about someone within the Kids Next Door Global Command wanting to falsely decommission number one and the rest of Sector V for that matter. And number one figures that he needs to gather up the rest of his team if they're going to have a chance of figuring out who's behind this false accusations of them being decommissioned. But number 274 notices and points out to number one that number 86, in a different 2x4 technology vehicle, has captured the other Sector V operatives and is heading for the moon base to begin the decommissioning process. Number 274 offers number one the chance to join him on the moon base so that they can rescue the rest of the Sector V operatives before the decommissioning process can begin. Number one appreciates the gesture, but he's worried that doing so could cause number 274 to be caught in the conflict as well. And he also refers to number 274 as an old friend. But number one says that number 274 can still help him out by trying to figure out who's behind these false accusations of decommissioning, and hoping that number 274 can clear Sector V's name while he goes to recruit some help before he joins number 274 on the moon base. So number one is heading off somewhere to recruit help, while number 274, though, seems to be nervous, trying to encourage number one to wait. Eventually, we see that number one has arrived at the Gilligan home, and he quickly locks the door, and he closes up the window blinds so that no Kids Next Door operatives can see where he is right now, because number one is trying to talk to Tommy, the younger brother of number two. Number one explains that he knows that number two has been teaching his younger brother about 2x4 technology, rockets, in fact, or yes, more specifically, 2x4 technology relating to rockets. And number one wants Tommy's help to construct a 2x4 technology rocket so they can get to the moon base. Tommy, though, at first Tommy is a little frustrated because he's still feeling frustrated over the events from his first appearance, Operation Tommy, where he wasn't really included in the Kids Next Door activities. And at first he questions number one about getting number two to help him out, but then number one points out to Tommy that number two and the rest of the Sector V operatives are about to be decommissioned, which is why he needs Tommy's help. Tommy, though, wants something in exchange for his help, and while number one offers to buy him an ice cream, Tommy insists that he wants to become a member of the Kids Next Door. Number one says that he doesn't have the authority to just make anyone into a Kids Next Door operative. So Tommy responds that number one will have to figure out a way to reach the moon base on his own. So number one eventually decides or compromises that he can make Tommy into a temporary junior operative or something along those lines. Tommy insists that he be a permanent temporary junior operative, despite the paradoxical nature of that title, and insists that he wants to be number T. Number one points out that T isn't a number, but Tommy is still insistent on being called number T. So number one finally relents, and he has Tommy's help with constructing a means to reach the moon base. On the moon base, we see the rest of the Sector V operatives are trying to reason with number 86 about how they're not actually teenagers right now, much like number 1 tried to reason earlier. Unfortunately, like number 1, the rest of the Sector V operatives see that number 86 simply won't listen to reason, and they even comment about how she is not the nicest of people in the world, but she brushes this off considering that they're going to be decommissioned soon anyway. We also see, out in space, we see that number 1 and Tommy are in space now. Tommy managed to create a 2x4 technology rocket, and they're on their way to the moon base. Tommy admits, though, that there are still some design flaws, but it seems to be enough to get them to the moon base, at least. While they're in the rocket, Tommy inquires number 1 about joining him at a birthday party. Number 1's wondering what... number 1 wonders what Tommy's talking about, and Tommy's pointing out that the envelope that number 1 still has on hand is an invitation to a birthday party, and number 1 does have a suspicious look on his face when he actually takes a closer look at the envelope. But soon Tommy sees the moon base, and he admits that it's a very cool sight. Number 1 agrees with Tommy about the moon base's site, and he also instructs Tommy to prepare the landing process. Tommy, however, admits that one of the design flaws of the rocket is he doesn't know how to land it. So the rocket's just heading straight for the moon base right now with no way of actually being able to land smoothly. Inside the moon base, we see number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5 are, they're tied up in these chairs right now, or they have cuffs around the arms of the chair. Pretty much they're bound to the chair so that they can't escape. And number 86 is explaining how the decommissioning process will erase their memories of their time in the kids next door, which means they won't remember each other as teammates or the missions they had together. Number 86 also takes a moment to admit that she always found number 4 to be cute, figuring that he's going to be decommissioned and have his memories erased, so it won't matter if she says this now. And she might find number 4 to be cute, but it's not enough to convince her to not decommission at least number 4. So the decommissioning process begins, these TV screens appear in front of the faces of the present Sector V operatives, and then suddenly these toilet plungers just pop out of the TV screens and they start to... there's toilet plungers on their faces. That's essentially the memory erasing process. And number 86 actually laughs at the sight of the rest of the Sector V operatives losing their memories. Suddenly, though, the rocket that number 1 and Tommy are in crashes into the decommissioning chamber, and number 86 is forced to leave the room, but the door is all sealed up as well now because of the rocket crash landing. So number 1 and Tommy are with the rest of the Sector V operatives in this room. Number 1 frees the rest of the Sector V operatives from the chairs, and the rest of the Sector V operatives thank number 1, but question who he is. Number 1 is sad to see that he was too late to arrive to save his teammates from the decommissioning process. But when he hears number 86 on the other side with other members of the decommissioning squad trying to break in, number 1 quickly recaps the plot of the series to the rest of his teammates, explains their status as his teammates and how they have no memories of him or their status as a team because of the decommissioning process, and how they're trying to figure out who's responsible for falsely accusing them of being scheduled for decommissioning. Unfortunately, because of the memory loss, the rest of the Sector V operatives don't believe number 1, and they do question number 2 at least questions why Tommy, his younger brother, is also present right now. Soon enough, though, number 86 and the rest of the decommissioning squad are able to break into the decommissioning chamber again. And so number 1 figures that their best chance of escape is to actually break the part of the room that they're in. Because, yeah, the part where the decommissioning process happens is actually on a circular floor, and it's being hung up in the air or suspended in the air by these 4 pathways, or at least 4 pathways. So number 1 actually breaks the pathways, so the part of the room that they're standing on will fall down. So it proceeds to fall down into different floors of the moon base. Eventually, it ended up the Sector V operatives and Tommy ended up landing in a room that number 274 is in right now. He's on his computer right now, and he's commenting about how Sector V and Sector Q are also on this list regarding the decommissioning process. Number 274 is glad to see number 1 has arrived, but then number 86 and the rest of the decommissioning squad arrive in the room to threaten the Sector V operatives and Tommy to keep their hands in the air and not to try any funny business. Number 274 apologizes to number 1, saying he tried all he could. Number 1 responds, though, that he'll have to miss number 274's birthday. Number 274 is bothered when he hears this, but he tries to insist that he doesn't know what number 1's talking about. Number 1, however, responds that he admits he was stumped about what possible reason someone would have to want to decommission him and his teammates. But then he said that his mail clued him in, and he pulls out the envelope that he still had on hand earlier. Number 86 grabs the envelope from number 1 and proceeds to read what's inside. And she announces to the rest of the decommissioning squad that this envelope contains an invitation to the 13th birthday party of number 274. Number 274 grumbles about how he kept insisting to his parents that he didn't want a birthday party, but they didn't listen to him. And number 1 proceeds to explain the whole story for the rest of the Kids Next Door operatives present, and us, the viewers, of course. But essentially, as number 1 explains it, number 274 is about to be 13 years old, which means he'll be eligible for decommissioning. So number 274 had hacked into the computers of the Kids Next Door organization to falsify his age so he could stay in the Kids Next Door organization. But after he did so, he realized or remembered that his parents had sent out invitations to the birthday party, and the Sector V operatives were some of the operatives that were invited to the birthday party. So number 274 figured that the only way that he could ensure that no other Kids Next Door operatives would be aware of his 13th birthday was to have their memories erased, and the only way to do that was through decommissioning. So yes, number 274 also hacked into the computers, and he falsified the ages of the operatives on the invitation list so that number 86 would take care of the rest. Number 86 and the rest of the decommissioning squad would take care of the decommissioning for number 274. Number 86 does not take kindly to the fact that she was being manipulated into doing someone else's dirty work. Number 274, though, justifies that an organization like the Kids Next Door doesn't run by itself. He even comments that he was the supreme leader. Number 274 says he's been the supreme leader for 5 years now, and he doesn't intend to let all of his hard work and effort be undone by the efforts of the rest of the Kids Next Door. But he calls them by the same insult that many other villains in the series have called the Kids Next Door, that insult being snot-nosed brats. Number 1 even points out to number 274 that he's starting to talk like a teenager now. So number 86 and the rest of the decommissioning squad take aim towards number 274 and tell him that he's the one who's going to be decommissioned now. Tommy, unfortunately, Tommy, in a rather unwise manner, runs up to number 274 to gloat to him about his failure. But this gives number 274 the chance to take Tommy as a hostage, and number 274 proceeds to input a code which allows the moon base to be detached from the moon, and he intends for the moon base to be sent towards the sun. Number 274 also takes refuge inside of the only escape pod. Yes, he takes a spacecraft meant for escaping. It's the only functioning one, according to number 274. So he intends to watch the moon base be burnt into the sun while he intends to watch the moon base be destroyed in the sun from the safety of this spacecraft, calling it his birthday gift to himself, as he laughs evilly and makes his escape. Number 86 and the rest of the decommissioning squad end up just running around and panicking. So number 1 tells his teammates that they should head up to the observation deck, and he manages to convince them, when they're stubborn about it, that they don't want to touch the sun because it's very hot. So the rest of the Sector V operatives do join number 1 on the observation deck and question him about any other ideas. Number 1 admits he doesn't know what else to do. He doesn't know what else to do right now, and admits that this day became really crazy really fast, considering it started with him just having a fishing trip with his dad. And hearing that actually leads to number 3 commenting about how she wishes that they could fish the moon back, and this gives number 5 an idea. Number 5 thinks that they should actually do what number 3 suggested. They should actually construct a fishing rod, a custom fishing rod, so that they can fish the moon and the moon base back together, so that they can use a custom fishing rod to bring the moon base back to the moon. And number 2 comments about how they can use some of the spare parts or spare 2x4 technology lying around to construct this custom fishing rod. Number 1 is glad to hear some semblance of his teammates, even with their current state of amnesia. So eventually they do construct a custom fishing rod, and they have number 4 on. Number 4 has the cloth. Number 4 is the one who's carrying the end of the cloth for the custom fishing rod, and number 1 instructs number 4. They're going to cast number 4 towards number 274's spacecraft, because the spacecraft is their best chance of bringing the moon base back to the moon. So number 4 is cast out into space with the cloth for the fishing rod, or the custom fishing rod, I should say. He enters the spacecraft that number 274 is piloting, and he's actually able to knock number 274 out rather easily after number 274 calls him squirt. Number 4 is also able to untie he's able to untie Tommy and free him, and Tommy comments about how between the two of them, Tommy has a better chance of piloting the spacecraft. So now that Tommy is free, he pilots the spacecraft, which is connected to the moon base through this custom fishing rod, and returns the moon base to the moon, and they're able to chain the moon base back to the moon again. So they're all safe and sound now. Number 86 thanks the Sector V operatives, even admitting that she's usually not one to thank anyone, and says that they're going to put number 274 in a prison room right now, so that they can decommission him shortly afterwards, or once they have the decommissioning chamber all reset up and restored, they'll have number 274 decommissioned. So they bring number 274 to a room where he awaits his inevitable decommissioning. Number 86 also tells the Sector V operatives with amnesia that although she isn't supposed to do this technically, she is willing to actually give them a chance to have their memories restored so that they can be recommissioned and be back in the Kids Next Door. She tells them to think about it while she and the rest of the decommissioning squad put number 274 in a chamber. So after they leave, number 1 questions if the Sector V operatives, the rest of the Sector V operatives, are willing to be recommissioned. He comments that he would like to have his teammates back again, and the rest of the Sector V operatives say yes, they're willing to have their memories restored and be a team once again. Tommy, though, questions what about him after all the help that he did, and number 1 says that Tommy did a good job. He thinks Tommy would make a great Kids Next Door operatives. But as number 1 had said before, it's not up to him to officially declare Kids Next Door operatives. He says that cadets, Kids Next Door cadets, have to go to the academy in order to become Kids Next Door operatives. This academy is located in a base, a Kids Next Door base that's located in Antarctica. So after that scene happens, we see number 274 in a room where he's awaiting his eventual decommissioning. But suddenly something breaks into the room, and it's a ejection pod from, yes, it's the ejection pod from Operation Space. So naturally, Kree emerges from the pod. Kree gloats to herself about how she's arrived at the moon base and how she plans to detach the moon base from the moon and send the moon base into the sun, only for number 274 to comment that he just tried that and he failed. Kree, while annoyed about how this plan ended up failing, but even though someone else, Kree is annoyed that the plan failed even though someone else attempted the plan, but she calmly says that she'll have to resort to plan B. Number 274 offers to help Kree, and she gladly accepts number 274's help, encouraging him to enter the ejection pod with her, and she calls him Kid. Number 274, however, responds that he's not a kid anymore, he's a teen now. So number 274 and Kree enter the ejection pod and they escape from the moon base. Instead of the usual ending credits instead of the usual background for the ending credits, we have a unique ending credits background which shows watercolor still images showing the rest of the Sector V operatives having their memories restored, thus being recommissioned into the Kids Next Door, and the Sector V treehouse being placed back into its proper place on the tree stump that's growing in the middle of the Uno home. Oh, and there's also a scene of number 86 supervising Tommy as she's cleaning up parts of the moon base from the rocket that he created and when it crashed into the moon base. And that's how we end this episode. So there you go. We have ourselves the Season 2 finale, which is also the second full episode of the series as a whole. And yes, Operation E.N.D concluded the storyline that was featured in earlier entries of Season 2. Earlier entries being Operation Support, Operation Kiss, and Operation Space, although the ending ended up having a twist where, although Kree was being built up as the villain, or the main villain of this storyline, or at least the villain who was doing the direct actions, or the villain who was directly acting upon this plan, because Father, of course, was, Kree is an apprentice of Father, and Father had instructed Kree with this plan. But, Kree was built up as the villain who was carrying out the actions of this plan throughout the course of this storyline, but it ended up with number 274 being the final boss of this storyline. Number 274 has turned traitor against the Kids Next Door. And yes, I touched up a little bit about this, although I didn't want to give away the betrayal just yet. I did comment before that in some of his blog posts, Tom Warburton had mentioned that number 274 was originally just intended to appear in his first appearance, Operation Chad, or Operation Chad was his only appearance when they originally created the character. However, when Season 2 rolled around and the Kids Next Door organization beyond Sector V began to become more important within the narrative of the story, Tom Warburton and the rest of the staff and crew members realized that they needed to have a supreme leader for the organization as a whole, and so they ended up choosing number 274. And yes, Tom Warburton did clarify in some of the same blog posts that number 274 turning traitor wasn't originally planned. This was something that they came up with, at least by the time, at least no later than when they started to come up with the idea for this episode. And yes, although they hadn't come up with the idea of him turning traitor beforehand, they still managed to foreshadow hints about number 274 eventually turning traitor, like his nervousness over number one's mail, and yeah, you could also say his nervousness about number one not joining him on the moon base was because he probably intended to have number one captured and decommissioned, he might have revealed his betrayal by then so number one could be decommissioned. Although it's amusing because number one's reason for declining number 274's offer was because he didn't want to get number 274 caught in the conflict. And we did hear number one refer to number 274 as an old friend. Yes, later entries do touch up on this particular detail. We do get to see a few flashbacks which do show number one and number 274's earlier bond, which it wasn't really addressed in earlier entries either, but yes, number one and number 274 do have a rather strong bond as apprentice and mentor. Number 274 was like a mentor to number one when he was entering the Kids Next Door. So the betrayal of number 274 really hits home for number one. And yes, I might as well go ahead and mention it now because I did hint at it beforehand, but yes, as the ending of the episode indicated, number 274 has escaped from being decommissioned, and he does go on to become a main villain in the series from here on out. Actually, he's one of number one's arch enemies, because beforehand, Father and the Delightful Children from down the lane could be considered number one's arch enemies. They are enemies to the Kids Next Door organization as a whole, and they do come to blows with Sector V more often than not, but they do have a more personal animosity towards number one, or he's the single operative in the organization that they single out. So yes, number 274 is in that same boat in the sense that he does go on to become an enemy of the rest of the Kids Next Door, but he does have a more personal animosity towards number one, and part of that is because of their past as a mentor and apprentice. So otherwise, for this episode, that's right, Tommy also returns, and I did comment on, I commented on it before. It's amusing how Tommy and Chad both ended up playing important roles in this episode because they both debuted in episode 10 of season 1. That's right, they both debuted in the same episode of season 1, episode 10, albeit in different segments, but still the same episode, so that was pretty amusing. And I think this episode was the one that put Tommy in a better light for some fans, because from what I remember, I remember a lot of fans weren't the biggest fans of Tommy, that's right. I remember a lot of fans not being the biggest fans of Tommy after his debut appearance, probably because he ended up helping the common cold out in that particular entry, even if it was for misguided reasons. But yes, it seems this episode was the one where a lot of fans viewed Tommy in a better light. And Tommy actually did end up becoming rather popular after this entry. And now this actually sets up a new storyline regarding Tommy joining the Kids Next Door organization. That storyline is focused on in the next season, season 3, so we'll go into greater detail about that particular storyline as we cover the entries of season 3. So otherwise, yes, number 86 had made a return in this entry. And this entry managed to show both number 86 in a rather unflattering light, to say the least, but also did show her more admirable qualities as well. Because, yeah, number 86, yeah, a lot of fans noticed number 86 seemed to take a lot of pleasure in seeing the rest of the Sector V operatives besides number 1 being decommissioned, because she gave out quite the laugh as she was watching them be decommissioned. Because I'd say, even at her worst, I don't think it would be right to call number 86 evil, even on her worst. So, yeah, I wouldn't call it an evil laugh because, yeah, she's not evil even on her worst days. But I'd say, I guess you could call it a jerkish laugh. That's probably the best way I can think to describe it. But yeah, number 86 seemed like she was enjoying the sight of the Sector V operatives being decommissioned a little too much, or she was enjoying the sight too much. Having said that, though, she was willing to acknowledge her mistakes as well. And yeah, some fans did notice, or that's right, yeah. Some fans also noticed that number 86 seemed to hold the idiot ball in this episode, because number 1 actually brought up a very logical explanation for why the computer was wrong, because they're in the same grade. He even points out that they shared the same kindergarten class, but number 86 still refused to listen, even though logic was staring her in the face, but she still wouldn't listen. So a lot of fans did think that number 86 kind of was holding the idiot ball there, although some fans took it as she's probably that dedicated to her job that it blinds her to irrationalities. And yeah, some fans have pointed out that there are plenty of people in real life who also can be very irrational or not listen to reason, no matter how much, who will say or do irrational things, no matter how irrational it's pointed out, or no matter how much it's pointed out that they're being irrational. And some also figured that flaw is probably what number 274 was counting on when he framed the Sector V operatives for being decommissioned. He probably counted on number 86's flaw being irrational about decommissioning, that he'd be able to get away with it. But as I said, number 86 did show some good qualities too. She was willing to acknowledge her mistake when she realized that number 274 manipulated her into decommissioning other Kids Next Door operatives on false accusations, and she did not take kindly to being manipulated like that. And she was gracious enough to thank them, something she admits she doesn't usually do, and giving them a chance to have their memories restored and be recommissioned, which they ended up taking. So yeah, Sector V is back together they're back together as a team now, although the rest of the Sector V operatives still demonstrated that they still have the skills they have that made them great Kids Next Door operatives, even if they didn't have their memories. So otherwise, I guess the other big thing I can think about for this particular episode is... Oh, that's right. There actually is another detail Tom Warburton commented on one of his blog posts. He mentioned that Operation End was originally intended to be a TV movie, actually, or he said there was this situation where the executives had told him the show needs a TV movie, so he came up with Operation End, or he and the staff and crew members came up with the idea of this episode, but then for some reason the executives said, oh no, it's too early for a TV movie, even though they told him about making a TV movie in the first place. And then later on, they questioned him about where the TV movie was, and yeah, he did not understand why they were giving him mixed answers. But yes, Tom Warburton was worried about if the show got canceled early on, he might have missed the chance to tell a great story. So instead of saving Operation End for a possible TV movie, he decided to just have it featured as a season finale, and vowed that if they ever got a TV movie, he and the rest of the staff and crew would work together to create a better story than Operation End. So otherwise, yes, I think that's about it for this particular episode. There was a lot to talk about for this particular episode, but yes, we finished up with the recap and thoughts for Season 2 of Codename Kids Next Door now, and so we'll be entering Season 3 very soon. Actually, funny enough, Season 3 actually starts with a full episode as well, so we'll be crossing that bridge eventually, but for now, there we go. As of this video, we've now discussed episode 26 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.